Hey, it's James Mulvaney. Welcome back to part 2 of getting booked onto 30 podcasts within 30 days. If you haven't watched part 1, I'd recommend you go back and see that. I'll put a link on the screen now so you can do that. In part 1, we cover over exactly how to write a pitch and how to identify podcasts that you think you could deliver value to as a guest, and also how to use the Matchmaker.fm platform to go out and find those podcasts and really start to refine and build lists of which podcasts you think would be great. In this video, I want to show you really the logistics of everything that's going on behind the scenes. How do you stay organized? How do you make sure you're turning up for your recordings on time? And how do you actually just track which podcasts are now live and which ones you've been on? All of that and more coming up in today's video. So let's get cracking. Okay, before we dive into the organization and how to actually coordinate your podcast tour, there are 3 key points I wanted to quickly raise and address. These are things that I've learned that perhaps weren't as obvious to me before I got started. Number 1, organization and timekeeping and cancellations. Now, it's safe to say people have got stuff on, right? They're not always doing a podcast as their primary source of income or their primary business. So a lot of people have podcasting as like a side hustle or something they do in their spare time or something that they do to complement an existing marketing strategy. Thus, the podcast isn't always number 1 priority, and people do rearrange, they have to cancel on you. Now, I'd say maybe 10 to 15% of podcasts were either no-shows, they had to cancel and reschedule, and those that often rescheduled did actually then turn up the next time. There were obviously a few that I didn't hear back from and nothing really materialized, which at the time is quite frustrating because you're like, oh, I'm nearly at this 30 target, I've only got 5 more to do, and then 3 are no-shows or 3 cancel on you, and then you obviously have to book more podcasts or different ones to kind of fill that gap. I think the main thing is you have to be patient here. I kind of assumed maybe if I booked 30 in, all 30 would be recorded and all 30 would go live. I probably ended up recording more like 40 to 50 podcasts or scheduling 40 to 50 podcasts. I ended up recording around 40, and some people, we just didn't hear back from, or they cancelled and, they've said they're putting it on hold. So I think patience is important. Sometimes people have to reschedule. It can be quite frustrating if you've got, say, 3 podcasts blocked out throughout the day. It means you've not got much else on that day apart from recording podcasts. You have to be flexible with your time, and this is why I said I'm just going to do it in 30 days, because I know during that 30-day period I haven't got a lot of other stuff going on. If you're busy and you just don't have time to do this, then I'd say wait till a month is kind of free-ish, so you can kind of really give it your all for a month. Okay, so next up, I would say you've got to try and keep it unique, keep it fresh, and make each podcast slightly different. If you just do the same spiel on each podcast, it becomes a little bit dull. Thirdly, you need to be super organized. You need to have a calendar. And as I mentioned before, we're going to show you exactly how to do all this now. I use a tool called Harmonizely. Let's dive in, and I want to show you exactly how I coordinated this whole effort. All right, so let's dive into the computer. I want to show you exactly how I organized and coordinated this entire project. Now, here you can see my inbox on Matchmaker, and I contacted a show called The Advertising Hour, all right? This is just brand new, actually. The guy who's just started it's called Scott. Had a great recording with him, I think early May. This was one of the earlier ones I recorded. Obviously, you can see here this pitch that we discussed in the previous video. If you've not seen the previous video, by the way, I'll put a link to it on the screen now so you can go and check that out. I talk about how to write an effective pitch, how to use Matchmaker to find shows that are relevant for what you want to talk about as a guest. Or if you're a podcaster, you can sign up to Matchmaker and use it to find great guests as well. But go and check out video 1 because I kind of explained the initial process. So we get a response from the podcast that we're potentially interested in being on. What was great about Scott is he actually said he was already recording another podcast called the Internet Marketing Podcast. Would I like to be on that as well? And I was like, of course I would, yeah. So we put 2 dates in to record. Now, my process for doing this is really straightforward. You can see here, I send them a unique link, which takes them to this page, okay? Now, this is a calendar booking system that I use. I'll run through a couple of options in a second. And it's really straightforward. This is what the person who wants to book in with me to record will see. So they'll choose a date. They will then choose a time slot, and then they will enter their name, the details, and also how they want to record or anything like that in here. Once this booking has been inserted into my diary, it will actually sync then with my calendar, and as you can see here, I have a couple of recordings lined up the day after tomorrow. So they look like this. I've got it all hooked up to my Apple desktop calendar. This is actually connected directly to my Google Calendar as well. This means two things. Not only does it show me when these events have been booked on my calendar and I have it synced across all my devices, but also it looks at what events I already have. So for example, if I've booked a day out of the office, it won't allow people to schedule podcasts on that day. I could also specify certain criteria, such as, allowing people to book between, say, 9 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. I don't want to be recording, in the middle of the night time. Or if I don't want to record on specific days of the week, I can block them out as well. Now, the tool I used to do this is called Harmonizely. I believe they have a free plan. I've been with them for a few months. In the past, I've used Calendly before. There's also Actuity Scheduling. These services all do they're very much the same thing. They're great. They make it so much easier than the old school way of, are you free on this day? Are you free on that day? Blah, blah, blah. So basically, you just send someone a link. It shows in their time zone, which makes it really easy for them. Again, when you're recording podcasts, many of the podcasts I recorded weren't in the UK. A lot of them were in the US, some were in Australia, etc. Really all over the world. So it's important that you have your time zones in sync, and tools like these just make it really straightforward to do so. So once I've got the recording in, I then mark them off the screen. Now, this is a way of organizing podcast. You see, I have this prospect list. I have my 3 tabs along the bottom. I have marketing and sales, startup and entrepreneurs, and personal branding and motivational stuff. These were the categories that I defined of podcasts that I wanted to sort of target in my initial pitches. The ones here in green, the ones that have actually been recorded. These ones are obviously other podcasts that we contacted, and perhaps we didn't get response from them, or they weren't interested or whatever. It's the ones with green that we know have actually been recorded. Again, if you look here, I just sort of take you through the columns. I've got podcast name, the link so I can check it out, the contact name of the person who's on the podcast, and their matchmaker URL. So, if I actually want to find one of the podcasts and review it, I can click on that link and I could just go straight back into Matchmaker. The date contacted. So this is basically the first date we actually outreach to them. And I didn't do all of this myself. I had Graham, who produces a lot of these videos for me, helping me out with this. Then the date it was scheduled, and also if we had a response from the podcaster as to when it was going live. And also then we kind of got a bit sloppy here, but the live URL. So, when you actually go live, you can click on it and see. I've been pretty bad about updating this, as you can see, but these are a handful of the podcasts that are now live in the personal branding and motivation. Next up, I'll take you to my big list. Now, again, I've just got a Google Doc here. Both me and Graham have got access to this. This is just a kind of, because I think sometimes these spreadsheets can get a bit crazy, especially when you have like loads of entries and columns. This is just a simple list of every single time I finished recording a podcast, I just stick down the person's name and their podcast name, right? So for example, the advertising hour, which I showed you before, this show has now gone live. Okay, so I'll put that in bold. So any show that is in bold, we know that's actually gone live. And if we want to find that, it's just easy enough to search it on Google and you can find it. I just found this list was an easy way of working versus just constantly relying on spreadsheets, kind of clean and simple. And also it was kind of good to see when I was getting towards 30, I was like, yes, we're nearly here. So yeah, thanks to Sean, and shout out to all of these guys. We're going to put a little bit of a montage in after this just to show you some of the podcasts that I got featured on. And thank you to everyone who has been involved in this challenge. So there we go, 30 podcasts in 30 days. I actually ended up doing more like 40 podcasts in 30 days. Went really well, worked like a charm. I'd fully recommend going on a podcast tour if you've got a new product to promote, if you're releasing a book, if you're trying to grow your audience, or just trying to make people more aware of your business or your services. Podcast tour is a perfect way of doing it. And I had a great time in the process. I met some awesome people. No doubt I've met some contacts that will be very useful for me moving forward with my journey and my businesses, and also, just generally built rapport with loads of fantastic people doing some awesome things. So I wanted to quickly give some kudos to every single podcast that was kind enough to have me on now. Let's cut to a little montage. I want to show you the podcasts that I was featured on, give you some clips, and also give you a bit of behind the scenes looks of how I actually was recording them, I guess. And that concludes this video. So thanks to all of the podcasts that had me on. I'll put a link to every single episode that's live below. Some episodes still aren't live, but we'll update that list as and when we can. All right, thanks to these guys. Take it easy.
This is Fresh Start Podcast. I'm Dave Henning, and today my guest is James Mulvaney. Great to meet you in person. We've been working together for well over a year, so thank you for being with me. Welcome.
No problem. Thank you very much for having me, David. It's a pleasure to be here.
Business Bros! Thinking about the future is kind of almost a habitual thing. So some people constantly in the future, some people are constantly in the past, and it's important to kind of bridge those into the present kind of mindset. But I think that as an entrepreneur, we have to kind of be more future focused, even if we need to be present.
Well, when I first started, I learned how to use Photoshop, and I was kind of learning Dreamweaver and a bit of HTML, and I was just doing odd jobs. I was like a handyman for the internet. So I was designing. You remember the little animated banners that used to be on all the websites? You don't see them as much now, but I was designing them for a period. And for a 16-year-old kid, I was getting paid like $50 here, $100. I was like, wow, this is like loads of money.
When I do the podcast, they've all been in person until obviously COVID-19 happened. Yes. And for me, I love being in the same room with someone, the energy, like the way they talk. Like, I do feel like it is a bit different when you can actually see the person interacting with them fully.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it also has led me to opening up who I do the podcast with.
Well, exactly. I'm doing these 30 podcasts in 30 days. And the guy I spoke to this morning was in Australia, and I think that's kind of part of the benefit of being able to do podcasting, is it allows you to expand your mind and speak to lots of people that you wouldn't normally get to speak to.
James, really appreciate you coming on. You get the song at the end as well. Goodbye to end the show. Thank you, James.
Cheers, Jason. Thanks very much for having me.
Thanks.
Hey, before you go anywhere, I have a quick question for you. Do you have a podcast? And if you do you want to book more interesting, high-profile guests on your show? Well, if you answered yes to either of these questions, I'd love to invite you to come and join our community over at matchmaker.fm. Matchmaker is a service that connects awesome podcasts just like yours with incredible and high-profile guests that make for really interesting conversations. It's really straightforward to get started and completely free to sign up. Just connect using your LinkedIn, Facebook, or Google account, and then you can begin connecting with guests based on their area of expertise, location, and much more. If you haven't checked it out already, go to matchmaker.fm, get started. It's just like Tinder, but for podcasters.